Hello. Some of you may know me already, but for those who don't know me, I'm Rachael Haynes, and I'm a PhD candidate, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the PhD topic that I've been researching, which is maladaptive daydreaming. Now, this is for a request from a number of people who've expressed their interest in this topic. Just to clarify, my PhD is in two parts, and I'll only be speaking today about part one. And this is because the PhD is currently undergoing submission and examination, and the second part of the thesis is an actual theory of maladaptive daydreaming, which I won't be able to share with you at this stage until the PhD has been marked and the theory has also been published. But I can certainly talk about the first part of the study, which came up with some interesting results. So what I'll do, I'm just going to share some slides with you, and then I'll do a presentation on maladaptive daydreaming in an Australian context. So on screen, you'll see that the first study that I'm going to be talking about looked at two Australian people who self-reported maladaptive daydreaming, but also were independently assessed using some tools to measure their maladaptive daydreaming. So I'm going to be giving you an overview of the first phase of this research, the first research pretty much in Australia into maladaptive daydreaming. So it's quite exciting. Of course, I would think that. Okay, so in summary, today I'll be talking about, well, what is maladaptive daydreaming? It kind of, the two words are quite easy to understand. Daydreaming is something that we all do to some extent. And when something becomes maladaptive, it means that it's problematic and it's bringing about difficulty. But it's actually more than just that really, really basic definition. So I'll go into a little bit more throughout the presentation about what maladaptive daydreaming actually looks like. Then I'll be speaking about how I came about the idea in researching maladaptive daydreaming and what were the origins of my interest into this topic area. It's a pretty interesting story, and one that I think for people who are looking for PhD topics, it kind of demonstrates how a PhD topic can emerge and become of interest to a researcher. And then I'll be talking about the previous research, the story of the research in terms of maladaptive daydreaming. It's quite a limited research body, so there's more work that's needed, but there are some topics that emerged from the research literature. So I'll be giving a little bit of an overview about that as well. Then I'll be talking about the methodology parts, what did I do, who were the participants, how did I analyze the data, and my findings, what did I find? And there were some interesting findings, one particular main one for each of the two case study participants that do link into the second study and into the theory. So you kind of get a bit of a taster of what the theory will look like. And then to finish up with, I'll talk about what's next as well. So daydreaming, when we think about daydreaming, we have to differentiate between normal daydreaming and maladaptive daydreaming. So I'll begin by talking about the functions of normal daydreaming. Now, pretty much everyone daydreams. It would be highly unlikely to come across a person who doesn't have an inner monologue. You know, that conversation with themselves where they role play things and they plan and they work through ideas through their daydreams. So a definition here that I've provided on the top of the slide It's that daydreaming is a short-term detachment from everyday life. So in life, we function, and daydreaming gives us a bit of a break from that. And it's just usually quite momentary. It's quite short-term. Now, in terms of our daydreaming, our fantasies are quite conscious. We're aware of them when they happen, but we're also present in the everyday world as well. Now, daydreaming's been defined by who we call the father of daydreaming, and that's Singer. And he, in 1966, described daydreaming as wish fulfillment, future planning, and the development of hopes and ambitions. So it's kind of a tool for us to process some of life's difficulties and some of life's problems as well. Now, on the other hand, Freud, we all love Freud, in 1908 suggested that daydreaming is an attention that moves from the external state to the internal state. And of course, it allows us to rectify our internal conflicts as well. So some of the functions of daydreaming might be, it might be an extension of childhood play, for instance. It could be an escape from stress, maybe a problem-solving skill, could be tuning into your creativity. It might be an ability to enhance our social skills through maybe practicing in our daydreamings, difficult situations. It could be a relief from boredom, or it might be an internal entertainment system. We are not quite sure at this stage of the function of daydreaming that's normal. So that is, it's kind of short term, it kind of flicks in and out of our conscious awareness. But on the other hand, maladaptive daydreaming, well, this is a term that was first suggested by Professor Eli Summer. Now, he's an Israeli professor, a psychologist, a lecturer. And in 2002, he was working across a trauma clinic in Israel and also within Haifa University as well. Now, he noticed that some of his patients in the trauma clinic were beginning to report to him excessive daydreaming, excessive fantasy worlds. And he wrote a qualitative inquiry article around this and gave this phenomenon the name of maladaptive daydreaming. Now, in the terminology around daydreaming, in daydreaming research, there's a bit of a mix of terminology, which can sometimes be problematic. So maladaptive daydreaming is also known as excessive daydreaming, compulsive fantasizing, mind wandering, and fantasy proneness as well, which I guess if you're a person experiencing maladaptive daydreaming might lead you down a different path in terms of the research. So for the benefit of my PhD, I'm going to use the terminology maladaptive daydreaming, just as Eli Summer has defined it. So what is this? What is this experience? Well, daydreaming that's maladaptive is an experience that extends beyond the normal expected daydreaming norms. Now, this can be sometimes for hours at a time every day, maybe up to 5 hours of daydreaming a day as well. So it's quite extensive levels of daydreaming. It involves some aspect of behavior that's kinesthetic. Now that means it's action-based. So it might involve, when the person is daydreaming, that they could be pacing, twirling, rocking, acting out the scenes, or mouthing actually what is happening in the daydreams from the perspectives of the characters within the daydreams. So that could potentially look quite unusual, I'm thinking, yes. Now, the people that report maladaptive daydreaming have reported that they are aware of both the real world and the daydreams simultaneously. So there's no confusion of what is real. Their daydreams are really vivid, so they play out like movies in their mind. They can be triggered by noise, or they can be triggered by, if you say the word Egypt, then they might have an Egyptian daydream. So they're very movie-like. People report intense emotional connections to the characters within their daydreams, reporting heightened emotions due to the daydreams as well. Some of the people that I've interviewed have reported feeling love towards their characters. That's quite a high level of emotion, I'm thinking. And often the daydreams have been around for many, many years, linked to early childhood, and that's when they may be commenced as well. So this is taking a long time, and it's taken up a lot of time, and it started really early in life. Now, the level of daydreams becomes problematic. This is the maladaptive nature of the daydreams, when it leads to difficulties in social situations. So people who daydream a lot may not have many social skills, for instance, because in the real world, they might have really extensive social skills in their daydream worlds. And they might have occupational difficulties because they cannot concentrate due to the level of daydreaming. It might have restricted them from achieving their academic goals. People often report who are students that they struggle to achieve their study goals as well. Some reasons have been offered within the literature. They are pretty much all psychopathology, so that means that they're linked to mental health. And these are childhood trauma has been identified as a potential origin of maladaptive daydreaming. ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, has been linked to maladaptive daydreaming. Obsessive compulsive disorder has also been linked, that obsessive nature of the inability to stop the daydreaming, so that's been linked. It's also more recently been suggested as a behavioural addiction, similar to any other addiction. It's been linked to anxiety disorder and also linked to levels of dissociation, which is pretty much when you kind of lose awareness of reality. So some interesting ideas there. Okay, moving on now to the beginning of my PhD idea, the origins of the idea. Well, let me tell you what happened. Wow, it must have been about 4.5 years ago. So that would have been 2014, 2015, around then. So this idea arose. I was working in my own private practice as a psychologist, and I was carrying out a clinical assessment with a new client. Her referral stated an anxiety disorder. So towards the end of the psychological assessment, she asked me if she could disclose something she'd never ever told anyone before. So, of course, I encouraged her to feel comfortable to do so. And she disclosed a behaviour to me which she felt was unhealthy and particularly problematic for her. She described experiencing a high level of daydreaming throughout the day, often accompanied by pacing or even running for maybe 4 hours of her day. She'd lost 35 kilos in 6 months through this action-based running whilst daydreaming. She described to me feeling embarrassed about the daydreaming, but explained that it was really highly emotional for her and that she felt love towards one of her particular daydream characters. So at this stage, I was intrigued that she'd been experiencing this since her childhood years. She told me she had not been dissociating, she was not zoning out, she was not losing time, she was not going to fairyland, for example. In her daydreams she was, but instead she was present both in the real world and her fantasy world simultaneously. So after this psychological appointment with this person, it really intrigued me, and it led me to carry out a month of research using the internet. I was typing in numerous search terms, excessive daydreaming, for example, and across a number of search engines. I was trying to do as wide a search as I could. So through this searching, I discovered the term maladaptive daydreaming. I printed out the article by Ellie Summer, the 2002 one, which described the phenomenon. And I provided this to the client. Together, we took some time to explore her experience in therapy and identified that she was, in fact, experiencing maladaptive daydreaming. To see the relief that she experienced was a real moment for me. She had a name for this problematic behavior that had been carrying on from the very beginning of her childhood. And this was the main thing that drove me to carry out the research within my PhD thesis. Okay, so an example that I'm going to share with you now, I'm going to share a bit of an overview, a collection of information and scenes from the movie The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. You might have heard of Walter Mitty. It's a famous book, a famous movie, and it's a comedic adaptation of a short story by James Thurber. Now, Ben Stiller plays Walter, and he's a proofreader at a magazine who experiences excessive daydreams to escape his tedious life. So what I'll do, I'm going to now share a quick overview video of the Walter Mitty movie, and I'm considering him the ultimate maladaptive daydreamer. So bear with me, I will remain here on camera, but what I might do is not speak whilst I'm showing the video to you. So bear with me.
We call the snow leopard a ghost cat. It never lets itself be seen.
In 2002, Professor Eli Summer published a paper describing a mental disorder called maladaptive daydreaming, which, as the name suggests, refers to a condition where excessive daydreaming becomes counterproductive and damaging to one's well-being. This condition is probably best portrayed in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, a movie about negative assets manager Walter, who appears to be dreaming his life away and presents many of the common symptoms of maladaptive daydreaming. Maladaptive daydreamers often have extremely elaborate daydreams that can even be compared to movies or novels in terms of scope and detail. They can be triggered by real-life events like interactions with others or listening to music. Another common symptom is acting out daydreams. We only see Walter briefly whispering a conversation he imagines, but in real life this can extend into acting out emotions and doing full-body enactments of the daydream. Maladaptive daydreaming can take up a lot of time, which is often made worse by a strong desire to keep daydreaming, and can therefore become counterproductive in completing everyday tasks. Although some tend to view maladaptive daydreaming as just some quirky trait of their personality.
What is it you call it when he goes into one of his little places?
Oh, zoned out.
You do that now and then.
There are others who approach it more as a harmful addiction that is not unlike substance abuse, in which the enjoyment of daydreaming is a deflection of a deeper issue, the issue of you not wanting to be you. One blog series in particular illustrates this deeper issue by using the following quote: "If you try to have a conversation with me, I can't bring myself to listen to you. I pretend to listen and you really think I do, but my mind is somewhere else, thinking about it. I feel as if I'm not here, but I'm not there either. And I can't shake off this feeling of being split in two."
Walter! Walter! Bye.
Oh, sorry. I was just...
Where do you go?
This quote seems to describe Walter's situation pretty accurately, as he repeatedly zones out of conversations, but it actually comes from a recovering heroin addict, pointing out the seriousness of the issue.
Walter! I was just saying I'll let you know when I hear back from Peg.
Okay. Thank you.
Maladaptive daydreamers use their daydreaming as a coping mechanism, expressing in their daydreams what they fail to express in real life. Looking closer at Walter's daydreams, we can see that they are exactly that. They are the feelings he didn't express, the words he didn't say, the journeys he never made, the beliefs he didn't defend. In short, it is the life he hasn't lived, the life that is only accessible to him in fantasy. By escaping into his daydreams, Walter, just like any other addict, cuts ties with his identity and ego, and therefore all the insecurities and problems that are bothering him, which, as the blog points out, is why daydreaming feels so damn good. And yet, it is this connection between our inner life and the outside world that is so vital for our ability to express ourselves, a connection which maladaptive daydreamers have lost. This is also what makes maladaptive daydreaming so insidiously addictive, because they express so much of themselves only in their daydreams. Daydreaming becomes part of the very core of their being, the only reminder of what it means to be fully alive. For many maladaptive daydreamers, giving up daydreaming feels like giving up a part of themselves, perhaps even the only part that strangely enough feels actually real. And in a sense, this is true. Maladaptive daydreaming is ultimately driven by a craving for life, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that this passion exists in the wrong place.
I used to have a mohawk and a backpack, and I guess this idea of who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do.
We see this in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty when Walter embarks on his journey to find a missing photograph, which I believe wasn't so much about him stepping outside of his comfort zone, but more so about rebuilding the bridge between his inner life and the outside world, holding on to the passion, love, and emotions that drove his daydreams, but redirecting them back to reality. This shift is also made clear in the filmmaking itself. In the beginning of the film, Walter is barely present in the frame, as if shying away from reality, which is in stark contrast with his fantasies, which are much more vivid and energetic. During Walter's journey, however, the energy from his fantasies is being redirected towards reality, showing in a somewhat exaggerated way how Walter begins to live life more passionately. His daydreaming also becomes less and less. One advice that is often given to maladaptive daydreamers is to avoid triggers and, very much like meditation, focus on the present moment and catch yourself when you're drifting off.
Stand. Yeah, right there. Right here.
We see this in a subtle scene where Walter rides a cab home after the first part of his journey. Unlike his earlier daydreams, Walter snaps out of this one himself and removes himself from the trigger. It is the last daydream he has in the movie. In the end, Walter finds the photograph but doesn't even look at it, because finding the photograph was never the real goal. Instead, his real victory lies in the newfound ability to express himself, in all the things he used to express in his daydreams, which are now expressed in reality, like his desire to travel and be more adventurous, his frustration with his boss, and his feelings towards his coworker. He no longer relies on the false comfort of his daydreams and allows himself to let his emotions flow into the present moment. For ultimately, it is only when we build a healthy relation between our inner life and the outside world that we can fully live our lives and, as we see symbolized through the snow leopard, fully experience its beauty.
What was the picture?
Let's just call it a ghost cat, Walter Mitty.
Okay. Okay, so I just took a moment to get the slides working again there, which they are now. So that was an interesting video, I think. It has some ideas that link with the theory that I have constructed as well, but I won't tell you the ideas at this stage. That will be another video for when I release the theory. Look, I'm going to talk now about the research into maladaptive daydreaming. If you were to carry out a search on Google Scholar on any university database, you wouldn't come up with very much information, to be honest. Maybe 15 or 16 articles It's growing as time progresses, but the information is quite limited. So when I was looking at the literature, I looked across the whole range of terminologies that I've mentioned before. So things like excessive daydreaming, mind wandering, fantasy proneness, and all those terminologies that are used to identify daydreaming as well. So that widened my search to maybe 100, 150 articles, which is pretty much what you're going to read in a PhD, and that's only on the daydreaming and maladaptive daydreaming. Of course, you've got all your methodological articles as well and ethical articles that you're going to be reading. But across this literature search, I saw 6 different kind of stories that emerged from the literature. So firstly, the first topic that came through the literature search was that some of the major sources of research, particularly Ellie Summers' research, was maybe being ignored by the scientific community. The idea of maladaptive daydreaming was not being picked up by the scientific community at all, was being challenged to some extent by psychologists, psychiatrists, and other researchers as well. But the research did actually get picked up by the community of people who identify with maladaptive daydreaming. Thousands and thousands of people across the world on the internet began to research maladaptive daydreaming and came together on forums and have been generating encouragement to the research community to engage in further research as well, which is one of the reasons that I responded with my PhD as well. This cry for help from people who experience maladaptive daydreaming and the scientific community was pretty much at some time ignoring major aspects of the research. So that was the first story that came out of the literature search. The second was the terminology confusion, which I guess if you're a daydream researcher, you might get led down a different pathway unless you knew all of the terminology. So it was really important to look at the research and be able to use the terminology to carry out a full literature search as well. Now, the next idea that appeared from the literature search was that, well, how is it best to measure daydreaming? There were a number of different techniques being used to measure daydreaming. Self-report, in-the-moment apps where you report your daydreaming, use of personality questionnaires, simulated daydreaming. It was pretty much a very mixed bag of measurement tools. So there was a bit of confusion about how to best measure daydreaming. Then the story that emerged next was that there was a limited theoretical base. There was only 15 maybe articles on maladaptive daydreaming. There was quite a bit more on normal daydreaming, but not so much on maladaptive daydreaming. So that was encouraging that my research could fit a gap that was needed. And then the fifth story that emerged was that the majority of the literature into maladaptive daydreaming, of course, wanted to explain the phenomenon. And this was through explanations that were psychopathologized. So this means that they were looking at mental health disorders or psychological experiences that would lead to a disorder. So it was pretty much that the research suggested that maladaptive daydreaming was a disorder. We will see if my research supports that. The sixth idea, and the final one that emerged from the literature search, was that the research was pretty much generically focused on the negatives of the experience of maladaptive daydreaming. You know, on the unusualness of movement, on how it affected functioning, on the links to different mental health disorders. So the adaptiveness or the positives of maladaptive daydreaming did not appear in the research. And I know that people report they enjoy the experience very much. And some people even get creative outcomes from their maladaptive daydreaming. So this was the story of the literature search within my PhD. So the rationale for my research, when we look at research, we try and look at finding something that will fill a gap, so something that is missing. Now, with there only being a few maladaptive daydreaming case studies within the academic literature, I felt that there was need for more as well. So this is why I chose to do case study research. The research had only really been carried out mainly in Israel, but also on worldwide online populations. There was no research as of yet that had focused on an Australian population. And in my mind, Australia is one of the most multicultural populations in the world, and it's highly representative of the general population. So I felt it was a good environment to carry out a country-specific research study. Now, both of my case study participants were mature female maladaptive daydreamers, both over the age of 35. So this then offered me an opportunity to discuss their maladaptive daydreaming across their lifespan. Okay, so I wasn't just looking at their current experience of maladaptive daydreaming, but across the lifespan, I was interested to know the whole story. Now, the second phase of my research has involved an analysis of data that's been collected on a Facebook forum over a 16-week period with 16 maladaptive daydreamers. Again, this was the first time that this has occurred. And again, they were all Australian adults as well. It was carrying it out online meant that people from anywhere in Australia, rural or urban, could participate. And finally, the final part of my filling a gap and adding my contribution to scientific knowledge, I guess you could say, was using a grounded theory methodology. Now, this was the first time, again, that it's been used ever in the world to generate a theory of maladaptive daydreaming. So this grounded theory, I'll explain later what grounded theory is, and that will provide a bit more context. So the two case studies. Okay, well, it took 6 months for me to be approved human research ethical approval through the University Ethics Committee. And this ethics application was a 70-page long document. Ooh, yes, and the second study also was a 70-page long document. So the process of ethical approval at times can take a long time. So it's really important to make sure that this study is ethical and causes no harm to the participants. So I designed some semi-structured questions. These were flexible. As the interviews were going along, I could develop them, I could probe, I could extend them. So it was a semi-structured interview. I also got permission in person from Professor Eli Summer when I met him in Israel in 2017 to use his developed maladaptive daydreaming scale, the 16-question version. And also he gave me permission to use his structured clinical interview for maladaptive daydreaming. So thank you, Professor Summer, for that permission to use your wonderful tools. So I did use those within the study. Let me point out that I didn't carry out the clinical interview. An independent assessor did, and she actually used those two tools. But I had permission for her to do that. Then the methodology continued with me developing a website about the study, and the website can be seen on the left of the slide here. It involved information about the research study. It involved information about me as a researcher, about my supervisors, and it was an expression of interest website that was shared on some of the Maladaptive Daydreaming forums, and people filled in the expression of interest, and then the independent assessor contacted them to recruit 2 participants who met the criteria. So the independent assessor did that through Skype, and it was an interesting scenario because everyone that applied to be the 2 case studies also expressed interest in the second phase of participating. So that meant that that first recruitment drive found most of the participants for the second study as well. So that was really helpful to do. So I carried out face-to-face interviews with the 2 participants. These were taped and then transcribed. And then a process of coding was carried out. Now this is grounded theory, and it's constructivist grounded theory. And in this, phases of coding are open coding, focus coding, and then theoretical coding. I'll explain these a little bit further when I reach the grounded theory section as well. But this type of coding is very, very time consuming as well. I have some pictures of the coding process that I will share as well. Let me introduce the 2 participants. Now, these have both been de-identified, which means that these are not their names, and the information that they have is very general so that they cannot be identified, and thus they have been provided with confidentiality. Diane is a 36-year-old female from a large city in Australia. She's married with a small child and works within a creative job full-time. Diane provided an in-depth view into her lifelong experience of her maladaptive daydreaming. She stated to me that she had experienced extensive daydreaming for as long as she could remember. Diane described experiencing a difficult childhood, which incorporated childhood trauma. The interview was the first time that Diane had spoken in any depth about her maladaptive daydreaming. Whilst Diane did identify with other maladaptive daydreamers, she provided me with new insights about how her own maladaptive daydreaming experienced differently to other people. Now, Cassie, on the other hand, is a 51-year-old female. These are not photographs of them, these are just general photographs. Again, she lives in a large city in Australia. She is married and has 2 grown children, and at the time of the interview was studying online. Now, Cassie described life as being very difficult due to engaging in high levels of maladaptive daydreaming on a daily basis. Similar to Diane, Cassie also expressed that she had daydreamed from as far back as she could remember. Another similarity between the 2 case study participants was that Cassie also disclosed a childhood trauma. In direct contrast to Diane's enthusiasm to be talking about her maladaptive daydreaming for the first time, Cassie's responses revealed to me a level of weariness about her maladaptive daydreaming experience over the years. So those are the 2 participants, Diane and Cassie. Let's see what happened. So constructivist grounded theory, a bit of a mouthful, yes? But if we look at the words individually, construction, well, this means that the researcher and the participant together construct from the data, okay? I'll explain that shortly. But the theory is grounded within the data. It comes from the data. It doesn't come from any preconceived ideas. The researcher, who's a constructivist researcher, prepares memos. Now, these are information sheets that are typed about previous biases, previous thinking, previous reading, previous thoughts, and adds that into the construction of the theory as well, so that everything comes from the data, not from pre-existing information. Now, constructivist grounded theory is one of 3 types of grounded theory. It's been created by Kathy Chalmers in 2008, and the other 2 theories, one is more of a traditional grounded theory by Glaser, and the other one is an interactionist grounded theory. Now that means that yes, so the general one, the traditional one, means that the researcher is a blank slate, okay, does not have any interaction at all, and just analyzes the data, okay. The second one is interactionist. That means that yes, the researcher is interacting with the data. But the third one, which I chose, constructivist grounded theory, means that I embed myself into the research to construct the theory. I'm completely involved. It's completely subjective. Now, the overall aim of the methodology is to construct an overall theory that provides explanation of all of the data, okay? It's highly time consuming, highly. If you imagine the interviews went for about an hour each, that generated about 20 pages of data for each person. That's a lot of information to analyze. Now, this analysis was carried out. Chalmers recommends that we carry out line-by-line coding firstly, using gerunds. Now, these are ing words. So words that are gerunds are like thinking about mental health, talking about trauma, describing childhood trauma. So that ing word, and you do that for every piece of information. So you have many gerunds that are generated from that. So an example here on the slide, I have highly intense emotional feelings towards my daydream characters. Well, I coded that as connecting deeply. Okay, and then the next stage is the joining together of codes. So that's the focus coding. So all of the gerunds are joined together. If they're talking about mental health, then you would have a new gerund that would be explaining that. And you join and join and join and focus this coding and so on until the data comes up with some theoretical explanations. And then what you're looking to do is you're looking to do some coding that's theoretical. You're trying to join the theoretical codes together to come up with one theory that explains everything until you have reached the point of saturation. Okay, so that takes a lot of time. Here we are. You can see on the left picture, we have my cat, who, funnily enough, I got a year before I met the person with maladaptive daydreaming, and I called my cat Ellie. Go figure. I didn't know about maladaptive daydreaming or Professor Ellie Summer, and my cat is exactly named Ellie, so it must be fate. And you can see here, all of the codes have been typed up onto paper, all of the gerunds, and then they have been cut out, grouped together, and then given a theme, and then carried on and carried on and carried on. And this was a paper sift. At the same time, I used QSR in vivo, which is a software package that used in qualitative research, and I simultaneously did coding on a computer program. So I did a paper code and I did a computer code, and everything came down to 2 main themes at this stage. Remember, we're just in stage 1, and some associated findings as well. And then I repeated this on the forum data in stage 2. So lots and lots and lots of work. You can see this took maybe 2 or 3 months to do. So what did I find? The main findings. Well, let's have a look at them. These are the similar findings at this stage. So we've got the who, the how, and the 2 participants, their findings, and then an example. Let me take you through them. So firstly, we have the 2 Australian female maladaptive daydreamers who were recruited online, and one was aged 36 and one was aged 51. Now, how was the data obtained and how were they recruited? Well, I've mentioned they were recruited online. They were independently assessed by my wonderful independent assessor who did that from the UK. Thank you for doing that. They were assessed using 2 maladaptive daydream tools, the Maladaptive Daydream Scale 16 questions and the structured clinical interview for maladaptive daydreaming as well by the independent assessor. Face-to-face interviews were carried out, and QSR, in vivo software and paper coding was carried out until some tentative grounded theories began to be constructed with the participants. When I say constructed with the participants were given the chance to review the transcripts and were also involved in the coding stage with me feeding back the findings as I was kind of going along as well. So participant 1, Diane, I think she just changed from 35 to 36 at that point. So yeah, she'll be a little bit older now. But her theme that appeared at this stage was that she experienced emotional growth through her maladaptive daydreaming because she was experiencing numerous fantasy lives. Now, let me share her words with you. I think it's best to do this as an example. She said, "For me, it allows me to explore my feelings. My daydreams are very feeling heavy because I have all of these characters with different lives. Now I have my son. I don't daydream as much as I get my emotional hits from him." So you can see she's talking about experience. The daydreaming was providing her with emotional growth because she was able to see situations from numerous perspectives and rewind and re-practice. And because she now has a son, she doesn't need to daydream as much. So her emotional growth comes from him. Participant 2, on the other hand, has a different experience of maladaptive daydreaming. And her experience is that her maladaptive daydreaming is filling in the gaps left in her life. Let me tell you more from her words. "Life for me at the moment is very difficult. I can't leave the house. I now stay away from the triggers to my anger, which is people. Being an only child, the character had a family. I didn't. It started again 2 years ago when my in-laws both died. Maybe it's the body's way or the brain's way of coping." So you can see that for her, when things happened in life that were difficult, she used her maladaptive daydreaming to cope with those things. So 2 findings that at this stage you might see some connection, but that may come through in the theoretical part in the second video that I will do. Now, some other similarities were found through the coding. Well, both people were mature maladaptive daydreamers. Both used their creative skills to work or to study. Both had ADHD and social phobia. This one's not correct. One was married with 1 child and the second one had 2. Both had experienced maladaptive daydreaming in early childhood. Both reported childhood trauma. Both had experienced embarrassment about their maladaptive daydreaming. They each had at times been able to control their maladaptive daydreaming. Now, for the second person, she'd been able to turn it on and off at will for 25 years, just like tuning into a game. Both of them had struggled with concentration and both experienced music and movement triggers of their maladaptive daydreaming. Both had really strong emotions about their characters and their worlds. Neither would have given up their maladaptive daydreaming worlds. They just really wanted to tune it down a little, turn down the volume on it. Both are part of the Maladaptive Daydream online forums, and both had access to mental health support. So these were the similarities between the 2 case study participants. Now, the next step, which has now been completed and coded and a theory constructed, was the 6-week Facebook secret group of 16 Australian maladaptive daydreamers. It was quite an amazing research experience for me to be able to watch these 16 people interact throughout the day for 6 weeks and sharing their experiences and sharing their intimate experiences and their thoughts and testing theories and asking each other questions. That was a pretty special moment. So I'd like to thank them as well as the 2 case study participants for taking part in my PhD research and in helping to construct the theory of the phenomenon of maladaptive daydreaming as well. So the grounded theory of maladaptive daydreaming has been constructed with an Australian population. Indeed, the second study, together with the first study, has generated a theory of maladaptive daydreaming, which is actually quite unique and different to what already exists. I'm hoping I'm building the anticipation for this theory. Now, the theory is quite a mouthful. You will see when it is published and when I share it. And for now, it's tightly protected until the PhD is submitted, until it's passed. Usually they don't pass first time, fingers crossed, you never know, it might, and until it's also printed in journals. So let's consider this video a bit of a taster for you into this research. I'm hoping you can see that the research is quite robust, quite novel, and quite interesting, I'm hoping as well. So what are the next steps for me? Well, it's currently thesis, we are in November 2019. At this stage, my supervisors are looking across the whole document, and of course they're going to send me it back with many, many changes. That's okay. We are tuning it, fine-tuning it. Once I've made those changes, that should be in around mid-November, the thesis then is getting sent to a proofreader who is going to look for things like spelling, grammar, and referencing, making sure that it's APA 6 style as well. And again, that may take me a week or 2 to make those changes and then submit. Ooh. Then whatever happens, happens. It takes about 12 weeks to get my response back. It goes to 2 examiners. I'm told they're in the Northern Hemisphere, not in the Southern Hemisphere, so that could take some time. And then I'll get their comments back and 1 of 3 decisions. Number 1, yay, passed, no changes, maybe. Number 2, minimal changes, or number 3, major changes, or a fail. Okay, so I'm hoping 1 or 2 will happen for me. Then I need to write 3 articles for publication. The first article will be on the 2 case studies and the findings. The second will be on the forum findings. And the third will be on the theory itself. Then my task is to get a lecturer role. So if anyone's watching this, please find me on LinkedIn and offer me a job. That would be nice. And then keep researching the topic for the rest of my working life. I guess you can see that I'm quite passionate about this. And yeah, it's something that I think can provide me with a working interest and my specialism for the rest of my academic life. So I would just like to thank you all for watching this recording. I'm hoping it didn't take too much of your time, and I will organise a second video once my PhD has been confirmed, and then I'll happily share the theory with you. Okay, thank you very much. If you need to send me any comments at this video, please email me. My email is rhaynes@csu.edu.au. So r.haynes@csu.edu.au. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it made sense, and feel free to interact and send me any questions. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.